Hi, my name is Richard Leiter, a self-published author of literary fiction, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Thoughts on Writing. Okay, so today we're going to talk about John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. Now, this is a book that I haven't read in over a half a century. There are a number of books that I haven't read in 50 years or more. I read most of these in high school or right after graduating from high school. For instance, I reread just recently Crime and Punishment, Moby Dick, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, Heart of Darkness, The Stranger, Death in Venice. So these are all books that it's been a long time, and Grapes of Wrath is at the top of them. Now, Grapes of Wrath, when I read this when I was 17 years old or 18 years old, I mean, I didn't think anything of it one way or the other. You know, I didn't think much about anything one way or the other when I was 17 years old. I was told that this was a literary masterpiece, an icon of American literature, and I just kind of said, okay, fine. And I read it, and that was it, you know. Now, it's kind of interesting because we'll get to see how I've changed, if I've changed in 50 years or not. Now, here's the thing about Grapes of Wrath. I purposely did not do any research on John Steinbeck. I didn't Google him. I didn't find out anything about his personal life. I didn't find out when he was born or died. I purposely, and this is very important, I purposely did not look into his political views or his political beliefs, because Grapes of Wrath is a very politically charged novel, let's face it, and I did not want to be influenced by any biographical facts. I wanted to read this book, and I do this with just about all books. I want to read a book based solely upon the merits of the book or its deficiencies, just on the book alone, not by any extra artistic considerations. Let's let this book stand or fall on its own merits. So that's why I avoided all of that stuff. Okay, so what's the plot of Grapes of Wrath? This is the story of the Joads. They're a family who live in Oklahoma back in the Depression, when the whole Midwest was plagued by the Dust Bowl. It made their tenant farmers. It made the land totally infertile. The crops wouldn't come in. They were basically starving to death during this time. I guess this was in the 30s, Depression era. And what happened was these tenant farmers, such as the Joads, were told by the banks, by the owners of the land, to get the hell off the property, to skedaddle. They couldn't produce anything, so they were just told to leave. They were evicted. And there were millions and millions of tenant farmers who were told to leave. And they did. What they did is they basically packed up all their stuff, the few things they had. They bought jalopies or trucks, third or fourth hand trucks, for $50 or $70, like the cheapest junk they could find that they could afford. And they all migrated to California, which was like a 2,000-mile trip across country for them. And the Joads were very representative of this group of migrant workers, of tenant farmers. They were disparagingly known as the Okies. And what happened was it was kind of simple. I mean, these Okies were, they received, before they left, before they were evicted, they got handbills, most of them, printed handbills saying that there was lots of work to be had in California, lots of peach picking and grape picking and cotton picking, and that was the place to go to if you really wanted to make a decent living for your family so you wouldn't starve to death like you were doing in Oklahoma or thereabouts, or Kansas. So they all believed this. They all believed that this story is kind of like a retelling of the Bible. It's the Hebrews leaving the land of Egypt for the promised land of milk and honey. And the promised land seemed to have been for these people. They believed that it was going to be California. That was the place for them. So they had to make this perilous voyage, 2,000 miles in the most broken down junk you could find. They barely had any food, any money. They had maybe $100 in their pocket to buy gasoline and to buy food, and they were always praying that their jalopies wouldn't break down, which they often did, and which is described many times in this novel. And they would some of them wouldn't make it. They would just give up. I guess starve to death on the side of the road before they could get to California for one reason or another. They got sick, they ran out of money, the cars broke down, sickness, who knows. Let's talk about the pros and the cons of this novel, kind of in the same way that I talked about the pros and the cons of Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer in a previous podcast. The pros of this novel are, I have a few notes, bear with me. Steinbeck is a great storyteller. I mean, this is an epic novel. It's an epic exodus or odyssey or voyage. This novel goes on for over 600 pages. So it's epic. And the Joad family is a very, very large family of dispossessed tenant farmers. They consist of the grandmother and the grandfather, grandma and grandpa. Then there's the mother and the father, known as Pa and Ma. And then there are the children. There's Tom. And Tom is kind of like the centerpiece of the family. He was played by Henry Fonda in the movie version of Grapes of Wrath. There's the children, Tom and Al, who's like the young buck. He knows how to drive the car. He knows all about cars, he and Tom. So when it breaks down, Al and Tom are able to fix the car or get new parts for it. Fix the truck or get new parts for it. And there's the sister Rose of Sharon, who's pregnant at the time, and then there are the two small children, Ruthie and Winifred, and then there's the uncle. He's a character, and they pick up this preacher along the way called Casey. And Casey is not a family member, but he's just somebody that they knew back in Oklahoma, and they like him. And he was once a preacher. He's no longer a preacher. He's a disbeliever, but he's always thinking, and he's always thinking out loud. He's very, very introspective, and he's very soulful. He's always soul-searching. So this is a huge family, dirt poor. It's a terrible situation for them. And So here's the thing about it. I mean, John Steinbeck's handling, his juggling of all of these characters, these of the family, is masterful. I mean, each one of them has their own distinctive personality. It's quite an undertaking to have done this, to go from one character to the next character in the way that he does. I mean, you have to be quite skillful to do this. I could never do this in my own writing. Forget it. The other thing is, I mean, throughout most of the novel, there's so much dialogue in this novel. All of the characters speak their own dialect, their own vernacular. John Steinbeck has the Okie dialect down cold. I mean, this guy knows how to speak Okie like you wouldn't believe. So you get involved, this is also part of the prose, you get involved immediately in the trials and tribulations of this huge exodus across the country. All of the problems they have, the car breaking down, the constant worrying about whether they have money, whether they have enough to buy gasoline. They meet people along the way, other folk like themselves who have been other Okies basically, and they have many encounters with them, and all this is told in a very very skillful way. And then Steinbeck talks beautifully about what happens when they finally make it, the Joad family, across country to the Promised Land. Well, what do you know? The Promised Land isn't all that it's cracked up to be. It's a horror show. It's a nightmare for them. And the reason that it's a nightmare is because nobody in California, no native Californians, either the inhabitants or the law, the sheriffs, the deputies, none of them want these Okies invading their country, their state. That's one of the things. I mean, they treat these people like the lowest form of pond scum. It's pitiable the way they're treated, how harshly they're treated. So these people go to California, the Jodes finally go there, and they find out that there isn't any work to be had. And the reason that there isn't any work to be had is because there are so many other people like them who have migrated to California looking for work. There are maybe 800 people that are needed in an orchard to pick peaches or grapes or pick cotton. And 5,000 people, 5,000 Okies will show up for the job. And so obviously the jobs are filled immediately. And what's even worse is that originally the owners of the property would advertise that it would be 90 cents for a box of peaches or whatever it was they were picking. But when they see how many people show up, who are starving basically, who are desperate for food, just for a day's wages to feed their family for that night, the owners say, well, no, we're not going to pay you 90 cents. We're going to pay you 50 cents. And then they lower it to 30 cents. And then they finally lower it to a nickel. I think that the Jodes are actually paid a nickel for a basket of peaches that they pick. I mean, you got to pick like 20 boxes to make $1. That takes all day. And you can't buy much to feed your family on $1. They eat the cheapest kind of food. They can't even... They're still hungry after they eat, and they have so little. And this is the way they live. They live like concentration camp refugees, from hand to mouth. They don't know where they're gonna. And once the job is done, if they are fortunate enough to get some work, as soon as the work ends, they're kicked off, and now they have to find new work, and they can't. And so they're basically starving all through this novel. They literally can't. They're worrying constantly. Where are they going to stay? They stay in tents. They stay in boxcars. At one point, they stay in a government camp, which has running water and toilets and plumbing, and that's the best they get. But that's a very brief, sojourn. The rest of the time, they're wandering, and nobody wants them. The cops treat them like garbage. And God forbid the Okies say, hey, I can't survive on 5 cents a box of picked peaches. They're accused of being Reds, of being commie agitators, and basically they're beaten up, or worse, they're murdered. So it's a very, very grim story. And John Steinbeck does depict it brilliantly, all of the grimness of it. And another thing is, I don't know if I've said this already, but there are long sections of this novel on the way to California, and when they're actually in California, where the Jode's truck is breaking down all the time, and there's such anxiety about whether the car will go or not. I mean, this is a huge part of the novel. And a large part of the time, Steinbeck gives very elaborate descriptions of how they're trying to find parts for their broken down vehicle, and he shows how they're. And thank God, two of the family members, Tom and the younger buck Al, are very savvy about fixing cars. They know a lot about it. Tom has been in prison, and he learned a lot about fixing cars when he was in prison for a while. So this is a big part of it, and the psychological strain of this is like enormous on the Okies. So this is basically the prose of the novel. It's an extremely gripping novel. It's epic in proportion. I don't know how Steinbeck was able to handle this number of characters, to juggle them the way that he does. And by the way, Steinbeck also, again, I didn't read his biography, but he knows they all go on Route 66. Route 66 is the main route that goes across the whole country to California. He seems to know Route 66 intimately, John Steinbeck. He knows the country. He has these descriptions of the dusty plains and the sunset sweeping over these desolate, barren areas. He seems to know this like the back of his hand. And he also seems to know, John Steinbeck, a lot about cars. He knows about different makes and models of cars. He knows about the parts of cars. He knows what to do. You almost feel at times that John Steinbeck was apprenticed to a garage before writing this novel so he could have enough material to write about convincingly. So that's also in it. Okay. So those are the pros of the novel. You can't trash this novel, okay? On the other hand, there are some cons here, and there are a lot of cons to it, in my opinion. And this is just my opinion and my take. It's very difficult also to review this novel without revealing something of your own political sympathies or leanings, because this is a very, very politically charged novel. It's all about social injustice, and one way or another, you're going to have to talk or reveal a little bit about your own attitudes. Here's the thing. In Tropic of Cancer, on my previous podcast, I mentioned how the book is basically structured like this. Henry Miller has his stories about living in Paris, penniless, mooching off of people, and it's interspersed with these long cosmic rants. So it's stories, rants. That's loosely the structure of Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer. Well, ironically, surprisingly enough, and I wasn't looking for this, Grapes of Wrath is kind of structured in exactly the same way. You have the actual story of the Jodes' exodus out of Egypt into the Promised Land, the land of milk and honey, interspersed with these long social injustice rants. His rants are different than Henry Miller's rants. Steinbeck's rants seem to indicate that he seems to believe that there is hope for humanity, that for the human race, that one day we will all get together, all of the oppressed farmers and oppressed peoples of the world, and something will happen. Some kind of revolution, maybe. He doesn't explicitly say revolution, but it kind of sounds like that to me. He's, let me give you just a very short quote, and what do you make of it? He says at one point, and someday, the armies of bitterness, those are the bitter tenant farmers who have been kicked off their land and who are being treated like crap now wherever they go. And someday, the armies of bitterness will all be going the same way, and they'll all walk together, and there'll be a dead terror from it. So what is he saying? Is he saying that workers of the world unite and watch out, property owners, because we're going to beat the crap out of you when we finally get it together and we unite? It certainly sounds like that to me. I mean, Steinbeck does not explicitly use the words socialism and capitalism in this book, but you can tell exactly what he's talking about when he uses this kind of rhetoric. And he also says something like, in the souls, in the eyes of the hungry, there is a growing wrath. In the souls of the people, the grapes of wrath are filling and growing heavy for the vintage. Well, what's the vintage? The vintage is the time when they all get together and they have their big overthrow of property owners, of the banks, of private ownership of property. It kind of seems like, I mean, I don't want to be political about it, but it sure as hell seems like it to me. And here's the thing. So now Henry Miller in his rants is not a social injustice kind of ranter, you know. His are more cosmic. He has a much more detached view of civilization than Steinbeck does. Like I say, Steinbeck still thinks there's hope for the world. Miller thinks, well, you know, civilization had, 10,000 years to get it together, and we didn't. We screwed it up. We failed. You know, we got wars just as much as ever. The people are just as stupid and ignorant and gullible as ever. They don't think for themselves. We have just as much corruption as ever. He says that's his view, and it's a much more cosmic view, to me anyway. And there's another person I have to tell you. There's an African American musician named Sun Ra. He had this kind of music called Afrofusion. And Sun Ra made a movie once called Space is the Place. And in this movie, there's a small tiny part of the movie where Sun Ra is kind of saying what Miller is. He's saying, give it up, Earth. Acknowledge your failure, civilization. You couldn't do it, okay? You had your chance and you blew it. So that's Miller's and Sun Ra's take on things. But Steinbeck doesn't think this. You see, Steinbeck thinks this. So he says, his view is, yes, humanity takes one step forward and it takes a half a step back. It never goes back all the way. It takes a half a step back, and then it goes forward a step, and a half a step back, and then forward again. So to Steinbeck, we're always moving forward. There's always progress. He's very upbeat about it. He actually literally says that several times. He says it once through the mouth of the narrator, and once through one of the characters, the same thing. It's always forward progress. No matter, even if we slide a little bit, we're going forward. And this to me is also emblematic of the socialist point of view. You know, the socialism is very much about progress. Everything has got to be about progress, about furthering of the cause. This is the main thing to them. No matter what happens, it's got to be, we have to have progress. We have to be going forward. If it's, for socialists, art for art's sake is a strange alien concept. They don't see people creating art for the sake of creating art for beauty's sake. For them, art has got to be kind of a form of propaganda. It's got to be something which furthers the cause to them. So this notion, when he talks about, you know, the one step forward and the half a step back, I immediately think to myself, this is socialist rhetoric to me. I can't help but think that. And from the very beginning of this novel, The Grapes of Wrath, you immediately know who the bad guys are and who the good guys are, who the villains are and who the heroes are. The villains are the banks, the owners of property who kick the Okies off of the land, off of their farms. They're the bad guys, and the good guys are the poor, humble, spiritual, God-fearing, kind-hearted, generous, patient, all-suffering people of the heartland. I mean, you know this by, I don't know, page 30 of the novel. And here's the thing, once you know it, that's not enough for Steinbeck. He pounds it away at you. Every interchapter, he's going into it more. He says the bank's bad, private ownership bad, and he presents the Okies in this glorified light, at least the Jodes, in this glorified light. Every one of them, they all have their own distinctive personalities, the members of the family, But boy, oh boy, are they, you can't hate any of them. They're all wonderful people. They're all suffering people. They're all deeply spiritual, patient. They go out of their way to help their fellow man. The mother, in particular, is like a Mother Teresa in this novel. It's amazing. So it's very sharp, the distinction. This is not a novel about real heroes and real villains. It's a novel about one ideology being evil and another ideology being good. And so, again, this is part, to me, the cons is that Steinbeck is so heavy-handed about this, about driving home this point. It becomes at times like a sermon. It's like it gets rather tiresome after a while. It's like you get the feeling that this isn't so much a novel as it is like a piece of propaganda. Like Steinbeck obviously has a huge agenda in this novel, and I don't like that. I'm not trying to make light of the suffering of the Okies, of the social, of the egregious social injustice, the way that these people were treated. They were treated so shabbily. But here's my thing. I don't like reading novels that have agendas like this. I don't like reading brilliantly written pieces of propaganda. And to me, this is brilliantly written, but it's also a piece of propaganda. I don't want that in a novel. I just don't want that. I don't want that being shoved down my throat. I want a story. Here's another thing that I don't like about, not that I don't like, but here's another thing I noticed about Grapes of Wrath. Reading Grapes of Wrath is like watching a train wreck or a car wreck in slow motion. Everything that happens to the Jodes, they get screwed all the time, no matter what. All the time, they're always the low man on the totem pole. It's just one disappointment after another. They're always struggling. They're always hungry. They always think they're going to get a job, picking peaches or something in California, and they always can't find work. It's one thing after the other. They're like living in a constant state of almost panic. How am I going to feed my family from one night to the next, kind of thing. And this is just all throughout the novel, from the beginning to the end, and there is no relief at all. There is no respite from it at all. It goes on like this, and it is a very, very upsetting and very, very grim narrative. I have to say, it from all I know, it's a perfectly accurate one, but it's grim all the way through. Another thing, at times, I was saying that I praised Steinbeck for being able to juggle these many characters that comprise the Jode family so masterfully. But sometimes John Steinbeck goes overboard, where the members of the family actually are no longer characters, but they're kind of like puppets. They're mouthpieces for John Steinbeck's particular point of view. For instance, there's one. This is very famous. I mean, this is in the movie also at the end, where Henry Fonda has kind of like a monologue, and Henry Fonda is saying to his mother, because he has to leave. He has to leave. The family. I won't get into it, but he says to his mother. He says to his mother, "Don't worry, Ma. Don't worry. I'll be everywhere, wherever you look. Whenever there's a fight so hungry people can eat, I'll be there. Wherever there's a cop beating up a guy, I'll be there. If Casey knowed why, I'd be the way guys yell when they're mad, and I'll be the way kids laugh when they're hungry and they know supper's ready. And when our folks eat the stuff they raise and live in the houses they build, why, I'll be there." So he's basically saying, it's almost cliched. It's like saying, don't worry, Ma, wherever you go, just look over your shoulder and I'll be there. It's like, what is it, the Michael Jackson song or something, you know? I'll be there, Ma, don't worry. I'll be the spirit of every man. I'll be the spirit of the heartland. This is not, he's no longer a character when he does this.